Hello everyone, my name is Glenn Benedict, and today I'd like to talk to you about censorship of LGBT materials in school libraries, um, external, internal, and self-censorship. I just want to start out with some definitions, some important terms and concepts. So for the purpose of this presentation, for the most part, I'm going to be using the phrase LGBTQ, which stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and queer or questioning. There are other terms that you can add on. I'm sure you're familiar with what's sometimes called the alphabet soup. But for the purposes of this presentation, that's the general term that I'm going to be using. So you may not be familiar with trans with an asterisk. So in this case, trans with an asterisk is a blanket term used to cover a variety of gender identities and expressions, including transgender, transsexual, gender nonconforming, genderqueer, two-spirit, and non-binary. Transgender is identifying as other than the gender a person was assigned at birth, and cisgender is identifying as the gender a person was assigned at birth. Gender identity is a person's deeply felt inner sense of being male, female, or something other or in between. And gender expression is a person's characteristics and behaviors such as appearance, dress, mannerisms, and speech patterns. And it's really important that librarians understand these different terms and concepts because that'll help them, especially in the school setting, relate to children and teenagers who are questioning their sexual orientation, their gender identity, and so being aware that there are these concepts really helps librarians to be able to serve their patrons better. So I'm going to talk a little bit about LGBTQ students in school settings. So just some statistics for you. LGBTQ young people are at a higher risk for bullying, suicide, violence, and other problems than other adolescents, and trans teens are at the highest risk. Over 75% report feeling unsafe at school. The average LGBT student comes out at age 15 or 16, meaning that their identity is developing while still in high school. The number of gay men and lesbians adopting and fostering children has increased. So not only are you dealing, our librarians have patrons who are, for whom sexual orientation and gender identity and expression issues are important to them. It's also important to their families. So their parents may be LGBTQ if they're not themselves. They may have siblings or other relatives or friends. So when we're talking about LGBTQ materials in schools, we're not just talking about students, we're also talking about the broader community that they live in. So why is this important? Many educators are unaware that there are elementary school age children who identify as LGBT. Some children read materials without checking it out. This is sometimes called stealth or under the radar library use. The fact that LGBT patrons may be uncomfortable with checking out books may be a contributor to the perception that these patrons don't exist. So, for example, many young people are unwilling to use their home computers to search the internet for LGBTQ topics, and they seek out the library for anonymity and safety. This adds to the discrimination and stigmatization that these youth experience. So the idea that that there are young, many educators are not aware that there are children that are interested in these topics, and so because their library use is sometimes under the radar, undetected, and educators themselves aren't aware that they have children that are interested in these topics, this adds to the discrimination and stigmatization that these youth experience. And again, why is this important? Fiction allows children to explore their own self of personal identity and teaches them that they are not alone. So going back to what we're saying about uh, children being interested in topics that are important to them and to their family, to their community. And it's important just for children to see themselves reflected in books and materials. And it's also important, again, that they can see, their parents, their siblings, their friends, and their the people around them reflected in fiction as well. So not just LGBTQ students, but students of all gender identities, gender expressions, and sexual orientations. So we'll talk a little bit about patron rights and librarian responsibilities. So the right to access information and to privacy under the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child is established, and the American Library Association advocates proactively providing and including materials representing a diverse views on gender identity and expression, and that includes sexual orientation as well. And we're going to see a little bit later in the presentation where this advocacy and representing diverse views is going to be controversial, because we're going to have some groups and some organizations are going to use this as a way to have materials with a different agenda, try to insert that into the school librarian's collection. So we're going to talk a bit about censorship and challenges. So an important part of, if you're a school librarian, is the school culture. So creating a safe place for LGBT students can be difficult due to political conflicts in the culture of the school. So is your school a public school or a private school? Is it urban? Is it rural? What is the general political climate of the area? And these are all important things to think about as you're looking to include or possibly exclude LGBTQ materials from your collections. So teachers and administrators may be blatantly homophobic or simply express discomfort with LGBT topics. So again, going back to the creating the safe place for students, what is going into the culture of the school? Pervasive homophobia often goes unchallenged and is embedded into the culture, institutions, and educators. So being aware that as a school librarian, if you feel that it is your responsibility to provide materials on these topics, you might be not only facing external pressures from outside groups, but you're also looking at possible challenges from within. So, the culture, institutions, and educators. Because many LGBT students are not comfortable discussing their sexuality with their parents or guardians, educators are often the first adults with whom they discuss these issues. Right. So looking back, if this is the climate in which these students are looking for information, it might not even be educators. The educators also include school librarians. So some information on selection. Children are more dependent on libraries for access to materials than teenagers, who have a wider access to bookstores and online resources. So basically, in other words, the younger the child, the more dependent they are on libraries if they're not able to get access to this information from their home situation. The quantity of materials may vary depending on the target audience. So picture books with LGBTQ content are not published as frequently as YA books with LGBTQ content. Additionally, LGBT picture books average fewer reviews than other materials, and often the reviews appear in sources outside the core collection development review sources. So it can be difficult, even if you're trying to introduce more diversity into a collection, you may not have the quality of the quantity of materials there, and it's hard to evaluate the quality of the materials because, again, these oftentimes these materials are not being reviewed in your traditional sources. I want to talk about a little bit about selection of trans materials, because oftentimes when we talk LGBTQ, a lot of times the T in, sitting for trans and the broader trans community is oftentimes sort of removed. So issues that are specific to trans individuals can become lost in the broader LGBTQ community, but there are many sources for LGBTQ books available to librarians and educators. Books by and about trans individuals can be hard to find. So just as an example of that, a review of 29 YA books by Letcher only includes 2 with explicitly transgender themes. Another article recommended LGBTQ novels for middle and high school students only featured 1 trans novel out of a list of 13. So oftentimes, even if you're putting that effort in, you're going to those other sources, looking for LGBTQ books to include in the collection, making sure that trans issues and trans authors are represented can be challenging. Because trans literature is underrepresented by mainstream publishers, it is therefore underrepresented in scholarly and professional sources. Many of the publishers releasing trans materials are small publishers. They may not be known to selectors who primarily work with children's and YA material. And so just talking more about schools, schools must be clear about what they may, should, and may not endorse. Conversations between administrators and educators can clarify school policies. Unclear policies can lead to self-censorship. So just being aware of the situation that you're in, do you have support from the administration? Do you have support from your fellow educators? If you feel like you don't, a lot of times that's what leads to self-censorship. You're not going to be selecting the materials for your library that it may need because you don't feel that you are being supported. So from the American Library Association, they have done, they collect information on challenged and banned books every year. This is a chart they have provided about challenges that they have reported to them. And so this is a chart of challenges by institution. So it shows what institutions are the most likely to beget challenges to materials. And the 3 biggest ones we're talking about are school libraries, public libraries, and the schools themselves. So as you can see, the blue is 1990 to 1999, the red is 2000 to 2009. As you can see, they've all decreased, but they are still by far the most, receiving well over 1,000 challenges in the last decade. And when we're talking about why are materials challenged, again, there are several that stand out a lot. Offensive language is one, homosexuality is one, sexually explicit. Oftentimes, sexually explicit will also refer back to homosexuality. And as you notice, this category here, other objections, has basically doubled in the last decade compared to in the 90s. Other objections, a lot of times because, a lot of times other objections include things like not suitable for age range. That often includes LGBTQ content. Other objections, just it is generally offensive. That a lot of times that includes LGBTQ material, so not suitable for age range. And so you might see religious viewpoint is sometimes cited having a pro-LGBTQ viewpoint. A lot of times it's considered to be anti-religious to the organizations and individuals that are making these challenges. So being aware that LGBTQ content does make up a number of challenges every year. So the people that are making these challenges or are complaining about the content of LGBTQ material in the collections generally fall into sort of 2 categories. There is people who are looking to flat out censor the material that is in the collection, and those that are demanding equal time for their viewpoints. So the censorship position As we have here, espoused by Brian Fisher, who is the Director of Issue Analysis at the American Family Association. He says Christian parents don't want to be concerned only about their own children. They want to keep this kind of warped literature out of the hands of other children as well. He is referring in this particular quote to a children's picture book that includes a fairy tale type story that has two male princes as a romantic couple. And the parents want this book for their children. There's nothing to stop them from going to Amazon and buying with their own money, but taxpayer dollars should not be spent on tripe like this. So as you can see, his position is just flat out censorship. Again, professional ethics of the American Library Association, along with various school positions. Generally, something this blatant is not going to get very far in terms of a challenge. What is coming up a lot more is the equal time argument. So organizations like Parents and Friends of Ex-Gays Engaged, which is PFOX, claim that their literature is being censored by librarians but not being cited for libraries. Often it is criticized for the quality of the research in this quote-unquote ex-gay or reparative therapy research, to which they respond that the medical and educational establishments are being, their positions on this this ex-gay issue is being led by LGBTQ activists. That is their sort of counter argument. So groups in support of ex-gay therapies and quote, what they describe as pro-family agendas claim that schools stock pro-LGBTQ materials that be tolerated at the expense of faith-based materials that promote opposing views. And so a quote from one of their members, let's expand the selection to get both sides in the library. When we do our discussion board questions, I'm going to have some questions about what do you think about this equal time argument. I think in general we can agree that the previous view, the flat-out censorship one, under American Library, under professional ethics, doesn't hold up. On the other hand, what about this equal time issue? All right, and so I just have some references here. All right, thank you for listening and have a good day.